Paul Mitchell, the sporting director of Newcastle United, has done an interview and it's leaving a few questions in my mind. These uneasy vibes at St James's Park are continuing, and I'm just starting to wonder, is there an underlying tension or power struggle at the club? Let's get into it in this video. Now, firstly, I'd like to say I appreciate the fact that Paul Mitchell has come out and done an interview to address the transfer window and the summer sort of shortcomings, and that is something that as a Newcastle supporter, we should be at least grateful for, because obviously the previous regime, we would have a terrible transfer window and no one would utter a word. So at least that is progress of sorts. But I don't know if it's great having your sporting director coming out and kind of publicly saying that the transfer window was a bit of a disaster and that he was just a passenger in it, and now his work really begins now. So it's a bit of an unusual one, and it kind of questions Howe's authority, I think. I think it's a big kind of statement about who is running this club and is Eddie Howe losing his grip on it. Now, I don't want to be alarmist or anything like that, but the reality is questions are being asked, and I think this video is just a way of me kind of processing some of my thoughts and getting some of my opinions out there about what I think is going on at the club. Now, I'm recording this literally on the day that the NFL season begins, and in the NFL, there is the key relationship in any club in the NFL is between the head coach and what they call the GM, the general manager in there, head of the front office, basically head of recruitment. And the best teams in the NFL, the ones who are consistently successful, have a GM and a head coach who absolutely get on with each other, have a great relationship and can work together really well. That is true in football as well as American football. This is why this interview by Mitchell is such an interesting one, in my opinion, because I don't know what he was trying to achieve with it. I don't know if it was a case of a bit of a PR offensive to kind of get Mitchell and Darren Eales kind of in favour with the fans, to say, yeah, look, we're now running this club, and it didn't quite go how we wanted, and that's kind of Eddie Howe's fault. That's kind of the underlying tone that we got, I think, in that interview. So what about Howe? Is this going to eventually play out in a few months or a year's time, where Eddie Howe is kind of either forced out or removed, or kind of decides that this is not what he wants to be part of? The fact is, history tells us that if there is tension between the sporting director and the manager, then one of them will go. And to be honest with you, that is going to be Eddie Howe. It's not going to be the guy who the Saudi PIF have put in place. So there's legitimate questions to be asked about this. And I've said before, I think there was I was feeling very uneasy about the way the summer went. Howe was making lots of guarded comments, but clearly making a point in some of his press conferences during the summer that things weren't all rosy. And obviously with Staveley leaving, his biggest ally, who just trusted him to get on and do what he wanted, has now gone. So I think Eddie Howe's feeling a bit uncomfortable about his particular role and his loss of some of the control over things like transfers. On the flip side, is this a case of the Saudi PIF actually starting to take Newcastle United a little bit more seriously than we've seen in the first couple of years of them being at the club? Well, let's be honest, it's nearly 3 years, isn't it? Nearly 3 years at the club. I'm not saying they haven't taken it seriously. There's a lot of money being spent. We've risen up the league very, very quickly, and we're very grateful for that. But there has been a few questions in the last sort of 6 months to a year where it's like, well, why are they not pumping money into this club in terms of infrastructure? Why have we not got a new training ground? Why is the stadium development not really happening, or we're not getting any information about that? We're still not sure of the answers to that. And that's, again, a bit of a frustration as a Newcastle supporter. This could be a sign that actually the Saudis are now taking this more seriously, and now maybe we're 3 years into this project and Saudi think, right, now's the time. Maybe this was always their plan. Now's the time to sort of take charge of this. The club under Staveley has been settled. It's now in a good place, but we need to now kick on, because ultimately I think Saudi PF probably thought we're going to get relegated in season 1, promotion in season 2, then we'll see how we do in season 3. And now we're at that point where it's like, okay, if we hadn't have, like, Eddie Howe did a miracle, kept us up, and then we got in the Champions League, it was all ahead of schedule, like we kept saying. So I just wonder if this was kind of like 3 years in was always going to be a bit of a point for them, where they decided once everything had settled down, they would then step in. it seems to me like they've got their guys running it now. I still don't know exactly what happened with Staveley, why she left. There's lots of theories about why she might have left, but ultimately it could have been a case of maybe it was always a plan, or maybe the Saudis just wanted to actually take control and run the club with their guys, and now they've got them, and Mitchell's one of them. Does Eddie Howe want too much power and say over transfers for the PIF's liking? It has to be a collaboration between the sporting director and the head coach, the manager. Howe doesn't appear to like that too much. I think he obviously does work with other people. He's worked with a group of people in the past, but he ultimately has had his view on things has always been much more highly taken rather than in a structure with a sporting director like Paul Mitchell, who he's the one who would have the final say on stuff instead of Howe. And I think that is not sitting easy with Howe. If you look at clubs like Manchester City, Arsenal, Liverpool, that is the structure that those clubs have. Those big clubs that are very, very successful have that kind of structure in place where the head coach is just given the players. Yeah, he has some say, but ultimately he's just given those players. Now, Mitchell does praise Howe often in his interview, and that seems great. But actually, when you read between the lines of what he's saying, it's kind of like it's very much laced with tones of, he's a smart guy, so he'll realise that my way is the way to do it. It's a bit like the old Brian Clough thing, isn't it, of getting the players to agree that actually his way is the right way. It's kind of laced with that, this interview, I think, and kind of like, if it's not, then he'll be gone. That's kind of what I feel like it's laced with. I might be totally wrong on that one, but it just sort of feels like that might be what's going on here. Mitchell talks about changing the way we do transfers. In fact, casting the net wider, looking across the globe, expanding the scouting network even more than we have done, and finding cheaper players from abroad, bringing them in, and getting them in the first team more quickly. Whereas Howe really likes Premier League experience, and I think in the past has kind of blocked or vetoed deals where that hasn't been the case from players coming from abroad. Now, it's obviously some of our biggest players and most successful players under Howe have come from abroad with no Premier League experience. Bruno, Botman, Isak, all of them came without Premier League experience. But I just wonder if those were so exceptionally talented that it was a no-brainer for Howe to take them because the level was clearly there from all of those players beforehand. Whereas some of the players we haven't signed, I just wonder if they're maybe not as talented and Howe just hasn't trusted them. But it's very hard to argue these days that Mitchell doesn't have a point, because actually I think we should be buying cheaper players from abroad. One of the things that was regularly said over the last few weeks of the summer transfer window was like, why are we only going for like one player? When the Gay transfer didn't go through, why for 70 million, why aren't we finding someone in Europe for 30 or 40 million who we can pick up cheaper, will do a pretty good job, if not an equally good job? Why are we not doing that? Like, where was that side of it? And it looks to me like Mitchell was he seemed a bit frustrated with that too, and he wants to change that. I just think that seems sensible. Now, if Howe can't get on board with that, you have to question, is Howe the right man at the club for that? Because ultimately, we've got to have a sporting director and a manager who actually get on with each other and are singing from the same hymn sheet. And at the moment, it very much feels like this interview with Mitchell is painting a picture of Howe isn't on the same page as him. And ultimately, for me, that feels like Eddie Howe might be at some point on his way out. I'm not saying it's going to happen immediately or anytime soon, but let's see what happens in January. Let's see what happens at the end of the season. It might be that it becomes untenable, in a sense, if Mitchell and him are rubbing each other up the wrong way. I try not to do sensationalism on this channel. I think if you've watched me long enough, you'll understand that that's not who I am. That's not how I view things and do things. I just think this particular situation, this is how I'm feeling about it. I just really feel like something's going on here that's deeper at the club, and I just think maybe Eddie Howe is looking at that England job as a perfect opportunity to get out of a situation that he's maybe not happy with. Again, might be wrong. It's just a bit of a feeling. But something's just not sitting right. Something just isn't sitting right for me. And I think that this Mitchell interview is very, very interesting and laced with undertones of, just kind of like a struggle underneath happening between the manager and the other guys who are running the club, including Mitchell himself. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching this video. And if you like what I do on this channel and you want to read some of my work, please go and check out my Substack. It's completely free. You can subscribe with an email address and you'll get all my articles emailed to you for free via Substack. So go and check that out. Link is in the description below.